Now, the jury deliberated for just over 11 hours over 2 days. CCTV's Nick Harper has been following the case for us. He's live in Boston with the latest. Nick?
Well, the victims and survivors of this bombing have waited 2 years, and after 2 days of deliberations, they finally got the verdicts that they were waiting for. As those verdicts were read out, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev had his head bowed, his arms crossed, and he showed no emotion whatsoever. The mother of one of the victims that he killed during that bombing, 8-year-old Martin Richard, simply sat there and cried. For her, it was the end, 2 years after the 2013 Boston Marathon was so horribly destroyed. The day Dzhokhar Tsarnaev brought terrorism to the streets of Boston. His homemade pressure cooker bombs packed full of ball bearings, ripping through a crowd full of families and children. The jury unanimously agreed with the prosecution that Tsarnaev was a teenage terrorist who set out to punish America. Tsarnaev and his older brother Tamerlan planted their bombs next to spectators, then fled the scene in the ensuing chaos. 3 people died, 260 were injured, 17 of them losing limbs. In the days that followed, Boston was placed on lockdown. An MIT police officer was found shot to death, and thousands of National Guard soldiers swarmed the city, searching for the brothers. As the manhunt moved to the residential suburbs, Tamerlan was killed following a police shootout that ended with Dzhokhar running over his older brother in an SUV. Wounded himself, Dzhokhar fled and hid in a boat parked in a garden, before a gun battle with police brought an end to the 4-day search. Afterwards, victims reacted to Tsarnaev's guilty verdicts.
I'm grateful to have him off the street. I'm grateful to show everyone, the world, that it's not tolerated. This is not how we behave.
Throughout, the defense painted Tamerlan as the leader, but the prosecution convinced the jury this was a 2-man job, that they were partners in crime. But Tsarnaev's lawyer said at the start of this trial he was involved. So this case has always been less about his guilt and more about the sentence that will now follow. Lawyers say the defense will now try to build sympathy for their client.
The defense is going to try and make the jury see the defendant as a person, not as a killer, as a person who was born a little baby infant into a particular family, who was brought up in a certain way, who went to school, was the captain of his wrestling team. It's a lot harder to kill a person than it is to kill a mass murderer.
Now, after 2 years of waiting, the guilty verdict confirms Tsarnaev as the self-radicalized student who came to the 2013 Boston Marathon with murder in his heart. Well, these verdicts are certainly another step in the long road, the long healing process for so many of these victims and survivors, but it isn't quite the end. We now move on to the sentencing phase. This is when the same jury will have to return to make one final decision, whether or not Dzhokhar Tsarnaev should be executed. That sentencing phase could take several weeks. We'll hear from a number of witnesses and victims. They'll return to court to give evidence. All of it starts on Monday, just 1 week before the 2015 Boston Marathon. Mike?
Nick Harper for us from Boston.